My name is Julissa, and at 34 years old, I thought I knew what betrayal looked like. I thought I understood the limits of cruelty another person could reach. I was wrong. The night my husband demanded I strip for his friends as entertainment, I stood in our living room and faced a choice that would change everything. What he didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this moment for months. When I took off my coat, his smirk disappeared. The room fell silent, and I finally took back my power. Before I tell you what happened that night, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And please hit that like button and subscribe, because what I'm about to share will show you exactly how I made sure his humiliation became permanent. Stay with me as I take you back to where it all began. I met Derek 6 years ago at a charity fundraiser in Seattle. I was working as an event coordinator, making sure every detail was perfect from the floral centerpieces to the timing of the auction. He was 37, then charming in that effortless way some men have dressed in a tailored suit that fit him perfectly. He worked in commercial real estate closing deals that made him good money and gave him an air of confidence I found attractive at the time. Our courtship felt like something out of a romance novel. He took me to romantic dinners at restaurants overlooking Puget Sound, where we'd watch the sunset paint the water gold and pink. We spent weekends exploring the San Juan Islands, hiking through forests that smelled of cedar and salt air. He remembered small things I mentioned in passing, like my favorite flowers or the way I took my coffee. Those thoughtful gestures made me believe I'd found someone who truly saw me. We got married in an intimate ceremony in Portland with 50 guests on a perfect autumn day. The leaves were changing colors, brilliant reds and golds, and I wore a simple ivory dress that made me feel beautiful. Standing there with Derek making promises about forever, I felt certain we were building something solid, something real. The first 2 years were happy. We supported each other's careers, talked about our dreams, made plans for the future. We bought a house together in a quiet neighborhood with tree-lined streets and friendly neighbors who waved when they saw us. We talked about starting a family someday, maybe in a year or two when we felt more settled. Our partnership felt equal. I thought we were a team. I grew up in Sacramento in a middle-class family where hard work and honesty were valued above everything else. My parents taught me to stand up for myself, to trust my instincts about people. I'd always been good at reading situations, understanding the unspoken dynamics in a room. It's what made me successful in my work as an event planner. I could anticipate what people needed before they asked, could smooth over potential problems before they became disasters. I loved my job. There was something deeply satisfying about creating beautiful experiences for people, whether it was a wedding or a corporate gala or a nonprofit fundraiser. I took pride in the details and making everything flow seamlessly. My clients trusted me, and I built a solid reputation in Seattle's event planning community. Outside of work, I had a life I enjoyed. I was close with my mother and my younger sister Emma, who was 28 and worked as a teacher. We talked several times a week, met for coffee or dinner regularly. I had a small circle of good friends from college who I'd stayed in touch with over the years. On weekends, I took pottery classes at a community center, finding something meditative in the act of shaping clay with my hands. I was part of a book club that met monthly. I liked hiking in the Cascades when the weather was good. I wasn't perfect, but I was content with who I was. I felt grounded in myself, confident in my abilities. That confidence would be tested in ways I never imagined. Around year 3 of our marriage, I started noticing small changes in Derek. He got a promotion at work, which should have been good news, but it came with longer hours and new colleagues who seemed to bring out a different side of him. He began making comments about my appearance that landed like small cuts. At dinner one night, he looked at me across the table and said, "You should wear something more flattering. That dress doesn't do anything for you." Another time when I reached for seconds at dinner, he said, "Maybe you should think about losing a few pounds." At first, I brushed these comments off. I told myself he was stressed from his new position, that he didn't mean to be hurtful. But the comments continued growing more frequent and more pointed. When I'd suggest we do something together on the weekend, he'd say he had plans with his work friends. When I asked to join, he'd tell me I wouldn't enjoy it, that it was just work talk anyway. He started inviting these work friends to our house more often. There were 3 main ones who became regular fixtures: Brad, Kyle, and Trevor. All in their 30s, all working in fields similar to Derek's, all loud and crude in ways that made me uncomfortable. They'd sit in our living room drinking beer, their voices getting louder as the night went on, making jokes about women that made my skin crawl. Derek would laugh along with them, something he never would have done when we first met. I found myself tensing up whenever I knew they were coming over. The way they looked at me, the offhand comments they'd make, the feeling that I was being evaluated and found wanting. Brad once said to Derek right in front of me, "Man, you're lucky. My girlfriend never shuts up." The implication was that I was quiet, submissive, the kind of woman who knew her place. Derek had laughed. As the months passed, Derek's criticism extended beyond my appearance. He started undermining my friendships. When I'd mention plans with my college friends, he'd say things like, "They're so boring. Don't you want to meet more interesting people?" When I'd spend time with Emma, he'd complain that I was always running off to see my family instead of being home with him. He convinced me to stop my pottery classes, calling them a waste of time and money. When I objected, saying the classes brought me joy and helped me relax, he told me I was being unreasonable and selfish. My world was shrinking, though I didn't fully recognize it at the time. I started second-guessing myself constantly. Maybe I was being too sensitive. Maybe I wasn't trying hard enough to understand his perspective. Maybe if I just adjusted a little more, things would get better. My sister Emma noticed the change in me. One afternoon when we met for lunch at a cafe near her school, she looked at me with concern and said, "Are you okay? You seem different. Derek seems different." I defended him automatically, saying he was just stressed with work, that every marriage had its challenges. But even as I spoke the words, I felt the lie of them in my mouth. Deep down, I knew something fundamental had shifted. The warmth that had drawn me to Derek in the first place was gone, replaced by something cold and calculating. The man who had remembered my favorite flowers now barely noticed when I walked into a room. The partner who had valued my opinions now dismissed them before I finished speaking. I was living with a stranger who wore my husband's face. The control Derek exerted over our life together intensified gradually, like water heating degree by degree until suddenly it's boiling. He took over managing our finances completely, even though I'd always been responsible with money. One evening when I asked about transferring some funds for a work expense, he said flatly, "I'll handle the money. You're not good with numbers." The statement was so absurd it took my breath away. I'd been managing my own finances successfully since college, had even helped him organize his chaotic accounts when we first got together. But Derek had rewritten that history in his mind. Now, according to him, I was financially incompetent and needed his oversight. He set up all our accounts so that I had to ask permission for anything beyond basic household expenses. It was infantilizing and infuriating, but whenever I tried to discuss it, he'd turn it into an argument about my inability to see reason. He started checking my phone randomly. I'd leave it on the counter while I showered, and I'd come back to find him scrolling through my messages. "Just making sure you're not talking to anyone I should know about," he'd say, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I had nothing to hide, but the invasion of privacy felt violating. My phone was personal, a space that should have been mine alone. But Derek acted like he had every right to monitor my communications. My world was shrinking in ways both obvious and subtle. Arguments became more frequent, usually starting over something small and escalating into full battles, where Derek would twist my words until I couldn't remember what we'd been fighting about in the first place. He was skilled at gaslighting, though I didn't have that term for it yet. He'd tell me I was remembering things wrong, that conversations we'd had never happened, that I was being too emotional and irrational to see the truth. I started documenting things in a small notebook I kept hidden in my car. Dates, times, what was said. I needed proof for myself that I wasn't losing my mind, that these things were really happening. Looking back, that notebook was the first sign I was preparing to leave, even though I didn't consciously admit it to myself yet. 6 months before the night everything came to a head, we hosted a dinner party for Derek's friends and their partners. I spent the entire day preparing. I roasted a chicken with garlic and herbs, made creamy mashed potatoes from scratch, roasted seasonal vegetables, until they were perfectly caramelized, and baked an apple pie that filled the house with the smell of cinnamon and butter. I set the table with our nice dishes, put out fresh flowers, made sure everything looked welcoming and warm. The evening started normally enough. Our guests arrived, drinks were poured, conversation flowed. But as the night progressed, Derek started making subtle digs at me in front of everyone. When I brought out the main course, he said loudly, "Julissa's not much of a cook, but she tries her best." Brad's girlfriend, a woman named Stephanie, who I barely knew, laughed uncomfortably and changed the subject. Later, when I was serving dessert, Derek looked at the pie and then at me and said, "Maybe you should skip dessert, honey. You've been looking a little heavy lately." He said it casually, like he was commenting on the weather, but the words landed in the middle of the table like a bomb. The conversation stopped. Everyone looked at their plates. I felt my face burning with humiliation, felt tears prickling behind my eyes that I refused to let fall. I excused myself to the kitchen, stood at the sink with my hands gripping the counter, breathing slowly and trying to compose myself. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to see Trevor, one of Derek's friends, standing in the doorway looking uncomfortable. "Don't take it personally," he said quietly. "Derek's just joking around. You know how he is." But his eyes told a different story. He pitied me. That somehow felt worse than the comment itself. That night after everyone left and Derek fell asleep easily like nothing had happened, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. I kept replaying the moment, the casual cruelty of it, the way no one had spoken up for me. I wondered when exactly my husband had become someone who would humiliate me in front of others. I wondered why I was still here. The next morning, I tried to talk to him about it. I waited until he'd had his coffee, approached the conversation carefully, kept my voice calm. "Why would you say that last night in front of everyone?" He shrugged, not looking up from his phone. "It was just a joke. You're too sensitive." I pushed back, which I'd been doing less and less. "It hurt me. I need you to respect me." His face hardened then, and he looked at me with something close to contempt. "Maybe if you took better care of yourself, I wouldn't have to say anything." The words cut deeper than the original comment. This wasn't about my weight or my cooking or anything I could fix by changing myself. This was about power and control. This was about Derek needing to diminish me to feel bigger himself. I saw it clearly in that moment, and something inside me shifted. I realized this wasn't going to get better. This was who he was now, or maybe who he'd always been underneath the charm. I started looking at him differently after that, started seeing the patterns I'd been ignoring, the way he needed to be the center of attention, the way he belittled anyone he perceived as weaker, the way he surrounded himself with friends who reinforced his worst qualities. I started wondering what it would take for me to leave. I began small acts of rebellion. I rejoined my pottery class without telling him. When he eventually noticed I was gone on Wednesday evenings, I told him I decided to go back and I wasn't asking permission. He was annoyed, but didn't push it, maybe sensing that I was reaching some kind of limit. I started having lunch with Emma more often, needing the connection to someone who saw me clearly and reminded me of who I really was. Emma saw the pain I was trying to hide. One afternoon, sitting across from me at our favorite Thai restaurant, she put down her fork and said directly, "You don't have to stay with him, you know that, right?" The words hung between us. I wanted to argue to defend my marriage, but I couldn't find the words. Instead, I just nodded slowly. "I'm not ready yet," I said quietly. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Whenever you are, I'm here." But leaving felt impossible. We had shared finances, a shared home, a shared life. Our families knew each other. We had mutual friends. The logistics of unraveling a marriage felt overwhelming. So I stayed, even as things got worse, waiting for something to push me over the edge I was already standing on. 3 months before the night in the living room, I found the receipt. I was doing laundry, emptying Derek's jacket pockets before putting it in the wash, when a small slip of paper fell out. Dinner for two at Canlis, one of the most expensive restaurants in Seattle. The date on the receipt was from the previous week, a night when Derek had told me he was working late on a big deal. My heart dropped into my stomach. I stood there in our laundry room holding that receipt and felt the world tilt. There had to be an explanation. Maybe it was a business dinner. Maybe the receipt was old and he'd just forgotten to throw it away. But even as I tried to rationalize it, I knew. Some part of me had known for a while. I started paying attention more carefully. I noticed things I'd been unconsciously overlooking. The way Derek's shirt sometimes smelled like perfume that wasn't mine. The way his phone would light up with text messages late at night that he'd quickly silence. The way he'd become suddenly fastidious about his appearance, buying new clothes, and spending more time at the gym. One evening, his phone was charging on the kitchen counter when a text came through. I wasn't trying to snoop. I just glanced at the screen naturally when it lit up. The preview showed a message from someone named Amber, with a heart emoji next to her name. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow," the message read. I felt sick. I confronted him that night, showed him the receipt, asked about Amber. He denied everything smoothly, his face a mask of confused innocence. "She's a client," he said. "The dinner was business. You're being paranoid." He turned it around on me, made me feel like I was the one with the problem for even asking. If you were more trusting, more secure, you wouldn't be inventing problems where there aren't any. But I knew. The knowledge sat in my chest like a stone. My husband was having an affair, and he thought I was too stupid or too weak to do anything about it. Derek's behavior deteriorated rapidly after that confrontation. It was like he'd decided he didn't need to hide anymore. Or maybe he wanted to hurt me. He'd stay out late without explanation, come home smelling like alcohol and unfamiliar perfume. When I asked where he'd been, he'd say vaguely, "Out with friends," and dare me with his eyes to push further. His cruelty became more overt. One night, watching television together in silence, an actress came on screen and Derek said, "Now that's what a woman should look like. At least she knows how to take care of herself." Another time, when I bought a new dress hoping to feel good about myself, he looked at it dismissively and said, "I guess if you like that sort of thing." His friends came over more frequently, and the dynamic was increasingly uncomfortable. They'd make comments about other women right in front of me, comparing me unfavorably to waitresses, or women they saw on television, or colleagues of theirs. Derek would join in enthusiastically, sometimes initiating the comparisons. I'd serve them drinks and snacks, and feel invisible, or worse, visible, only as an object of derision. Brad said once, sprawled on our couch with a beer, "Man, at least she's quiet. That's something." The comment was meant as a compliment, I think, but it made me feel less than human. A piece of furniture that had the added benefit of being able to fetch more beer when needed. I started to feel myself disappearing. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't recognize the woman staring back. Where had the confident event planner gone? The woman who commanded rooms and solved problems and made things beautiful. She was fading, replaced by someone small and scared and uncertain of everything. 2 months before the final confrontation, Derek announced another gathering at our house. "Guys' night," he called it, though he expected me to be there to serve and clean up. I played the role, brought out chips and beer, tidied up their mess, and tried to be invisible. But I overheard their conversation from the kitchen, and what I heard made my blood run cold. Brad said, laughing, "Man, you've got her trained well." Derek's response came quickly, full of pride. "She knows her place." The men laughed together, and I stood frozen at the sink, hands in soapy water, feeling something fundamental crack inside me. That was the night something shifted permanently. I wasn't sad anymore. I was angry. Angry at Derek for becoming this person. Angry at his friends for enabling him. But mostly angry at myself for allowing it to go on this long. The next day, I made an appointment with a divorce attorney. Her name was Patricia, a woman in her mid-50s with sharp eyes and a kind smile. I sat in her clean professional office and told her everything. She listened without judgment, taking notes occasionally. When I finished, she leaned forward and said, "You'll need documentation, financial records showing any suspicious transactions, proof of the affair if you can get it, anything that demonstrates his behavior." I went home and started gathering evidence methodically. I made copies of bank statements noting charges that didn't make sense. I took screenshots of text messages before Derek deleted them. I photographed receipts I found. I documented every cruel comment, every humiliation, building a case piece by piece. Every new piece of evidence didn't break me anymore. It strengthened my resolve. I was preparing for war, and I was going to win. 1 week before the night that would end, everything Derek announced, he was having another gathering. More specific this time. His friends were coming over on Saturday. Brad, Kyle, Trevor, and 2 other guys from work I'd only met once or twice. "Make sure the house looks good and there's plenty of beer in the fridge," he ordered, not asked. I agreed, outwardly playing the compliant wife, but inside I was making different plans. I contacted Patricia and told her I was ready. The divorce papers were drawn up, reviewed, signed. They'd be filed on Monday, but Derek would be served the papers after the weekend. I had a plan for Saturday night, something I'd been preparing for weeks now. I'd had custom clothing made, a simple black shirt with specific text printed on the front in large white letters. I gathered all my evidence into a folder. I made copies of everything and stored them in 3 different locations. I told Emma what was going to happen. Saturday night, I said, be ready for my call. She promised she would be. I spent the week in a state of focused calm. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't scared. I felt clear-headed for the first time in months, like I'd been walking through fog, and suddenly the sun burned it away. This would be the last time Derek humiliated me. After Saturday, I would be free. Saturday evening arrived. Derek's friends showed up at 7, already loud, already drinking. They filled our living room with their noise and their presence spreading out on the furniture like they owned the place. I wore a long wool coat, unusual for being indoors, but I had my reasons. No one commented on it. They barely looked at me. I served drinks on autopilot, put out food I'd prepared earlier, played the role one final time. They talked around me and through me like I wasn't there. Just background noise, a servant in my own home. By 8, they were well into their drinking. The jokes got cruder, the laughter louder. I waited. Around 9, the conversation turned to women, as it always did with this group. Brad brought up a strip club they'd been to some night out that I'd know nothing about. Kyle added details, laughing. Derek joined in enthusiastically, describing dancers and experiences, with no shame, no concern that his wife was standing 10 feet away. The conversation spiraled, getting more degrading with each contribution. Then around 9:30, Derek stood up. He swayed, slightly drunk, but not completely gone. He looked around at his friends with a grin and said, "You know what would make this night even better?" The room quieted, everyone turning to look at him. My stomach tightened. I knew what was coming. Somehow I knew. "Julissa should give us a little show," he said. The words hung in the air. Brad and Kyle started laughing immediately. Trevor looked uncomfortable but said nothing. The other 2 guys exchanged glances, uncertain but intrigued. I stood completely still, the folder in my hand, behind my back, waiting. "What?" I said quietly, though I'd heard perfectly. Derek's grin widened. "A little dance, some entertainment, maybe take off a few things." He said it like it was the most reasonable suggestion in the world, like I was a performer he'd hired for the evening, not his wife. "Derek, no," I said, keeping my voice level. His face darkened. The playful mask dropped. "Don't be boring. My friends are here. We want some entertainment. Is that too much to ask? I'm your wife, not entertainment," I said. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to that particular tone he used when he wanted to intimidate me. "You live in my house. You eat food I pay for. You don't work enough to support yourself. The least you can do is be useful for once." The room had gone completely silent. Every man there was watching. Some looked excited by the conflict. Some looked uncomfortable. But none of them spoke up. None of them told Derek he was out of line. They just watched, waiting to see what would happen next. This was the moment. This was what I'd been preparing for. Everything had led here to this crystallized point of absolute clarity. I felt completely calm. The nervousness I'd expected never came. Instead, I felt powerful. "Fine," I said. Derek's face lit up with triumph. His smirk returned, uglier than before. "That's better. That's my girl." I walked slowly to the center of the room, aware of every eye on me. I set the folder down on the coffee table within easy reach. Then I reached for the buttons of my long coat. I unbuttoned the coat slowly, letting the anticipation build. Derek and his friends watched, some grinning, some leaning forward in their seats. The room was completely silent, except for the sound of someone's breathing and the quiet click of each button coming undone. Derek's smirk was wide, satisfied. He thought he'd won. He thought I'd finally been broken down into exactly what he wanted me to be. I let the coat fall from my shoulders. It dropped to the floor in a soft heap of wool and fabric. Underneath, I wore the shirt I'd had made, plain black cotton. But across the front, in large white block letters, impossible to miss, were words I'd chosen carefully. "I know about Amber. I know about the money you've been hiding. I know everything. Divorce papers are filed. You have nothing." The change in the room was instantaneous. The grin vanished from Derek's face like someone had switched off a light. The color drained from his skin, leaving him pale and shocked. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Brad, who'd been mid-drink, lowered his beer, slowly staring. Kyle's jaw actually dropped. Trevor stood up from his chair, looking genuinely shocked. The other two guys just froze, clearly trying to process what they were seeing. For several long seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The silence was absolute and beautiful. Then Derek found his voice, though it came out shaky and uncertain. "What is this?" I reached down and picked up the folder from the coffee table. My hands were steady. My voice when I spoke was clear and calm. "This," I said, holding up the folder, "is 6 months of documentation." I opened the folder and pulled out the first set of papers. Bank statements highlighted in yellow where I'd marked the relevant transactions. Bank statements showing the $20,000 you transferred to a secret account over the past 4 months. Small amounts at a time, thinking I wouldn't notice. Derek's face went from white to red. "You went through my accounts." "Our accounts," I corrected. "Joint accounts that I have every legal right to access." I pulled out more papers. "Text messages between you and Amber discussing your plans for a future together. Your promises to leave me once you had enough money hidden away." "How did you get those?" His voice cracked. "You're not as careful as you think you are," I said simply. I pulled out more evidence. "Receipts from hotel rooms you rented. Always paid in cash, but you kept the receipts in your car. Did you know your jacket pocket has a hole? Things fall through into the lining." I showed the receipts to the room. "Photos from Amber's social media showing the two of you together at places you told me were work trips." Each new revelation hit Derek like a physical blow. He tried to step forward, tried to grab the papers from my hands, but I moved back easily. His friends sat frozen, watching their evening of entertainment turn into Derek's public destruction. "This is private," Derek said desperately. "This is between us. You can't just what?" I interrupted. "Can't just expose the truth. You wanted a show, Derek. You wanted entertainment. Here it is." I turned to address his friends directly, something I'd never done before. They'd always treated me like I wasn't worth talking to, like I existed only to serve and be mocked. Now they had no choice but to listen. "Did any of you know he's been stealing from our joint account money we both put in, that we both earned, that was supposed to be for our future together?" I looked at each of them. Brad wouldn't meet my eyes. "Did you know he told Amber he was leaving me, that he described me to her as boring and inadequate, that he laughed about how easy I was to control?" Trevor at least had the decency to look ashamed. Kyle stared at the floor. The other two guys seemed to be trying to disappear into the couch. "You all sat here for months," I continued. "Watched him treat me like garbage, laughed at his jokes about my weight, my intelligence, my worth. Not one of you ever said a word. You just watched and laughed and encouraged him." The room stayed silent. What could they say? I was right. And they knew it. Derek made one last attempt to regain control. "Julissa, come on. We can talk about this. We can work this out. These guys don't need to be here for this." "No," I said firmly. "We're not talking. We're done talking. I've been talking for months and you haven't heard a single word I've said." I pulled out the final document from the folder. The divorce papers, official and legal, and already filed with the court. "These were filed 3 days ago. You'll be served officially on Monday morning, but I wanted you to see them now." Derek's hands shook as he reached for the papers. I handed them to him, watched him scan the first page, saw the moment the reality of it hit him. His face crumpled. "I've already moved my half of the money from our accounts to one in my name only," I continued. "Exactly 50% of what we both contributed. My attorney says the affair and the financial dishonesty will work heavily in my favor for the division of assets. The house will likely be sold and we'll split the proceeds, though, given your behavior, I might end up with a larger share." "You can't do this," Derek said, but his voice had no strength left in it. "I already did." I bent down and picked up my coat from the floor, draped it over my arm with all the dignity I'd been denied for so long. "I'm staying at my sister's tonight. I'll be back tomorrow with a moving company to get my things. I'd appreciate it if you weren't here." Derek's face was a mixture of shock, anger, and something that might have been fear. "Julissa, please, don't do this. I'm sorry. I'll change. I'll do better." The apology meant nothing. It was too late and too empty. "You should have thought about that before you asked me to strip for your friends," I said quietly. I walked toward the door, passing his silent friends, who'd become unwilling witnesses to their evening's destruction. None of them moved. None of them spoke. At the doorway, I turned back one final time. "For the record," I said, looking directly at Derek, "I was a good wife. I loved you. I supported you. I tried to build a life with you. But you mistook my kindness for weakness. You thought being gentle meant being powerless. That was your mistake, not mine." Derek stood in the middle of the room, surrounded by his friends, holding divorce papers in hands that wouldn't stop shaking. He looked small suddenly, diminished. All his swagger and confidence had evaporated, leaving behind just a man who'd underestimated his wife and would spend a long time regretting it. I walked out, left the door open behind me, got into my car where I'd packed a bag that morning, and drove away from that house without looking back even once. I drove to Emma's apartment across town. My hands were steady on the wheel. I felt clear-headed, almost euphoric. The confrontation I'd been dreading had actually happened, and I'd gotten through it. More than that, I'd controlled it. I'd taken Derek's attempt to humiliate me and turned it into his own exposure. Emma was waiting up for me. She'd made up the guest bed and had tea ready. When she opened the door and saw my face, she pulled me into a tight hug. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Free," I said, and then finally safe. I cried. Not for Derek or for the end of my marriage. I cried for all the months I'd spent doubting myself, for the confidence I'd lost, for the woman I'd allowed myself to become, for all the time I'd wasted trying to fix something that was irreparably broken. Emma held me while I cried, didn't try to stop me or tell me it would be okay. She just held me and let me grieve for what I'd lost. After a while, the tears stopped. I felt lighter. Emptied out, but in a good way, like I'd purged something toxic from my system. That night I slept better than I had in months. No anxiety, no walking on eggshells, no hypervigilance about what mood Derek might be in. Just deep, dreamless sleep. The next morning was Sunday. Derek called 17 times. I let every call go to voicemail. He sent texts throughout the day, a progression from angry to desperate to pleading. "You're making a huge mistake. We can fix this. I love you. Please come home. You're going to regret this." I read each one with detachment, feeling nothing. Then I blocked his number. My attorney Patricia called mid-morning. "I heard what happened last night," she said. She sounded pleased. "One of his friends apparently told his girlfriend, who told her sister, who happens to be someone I know. The story's already spreading." I wasn't surprised. A humiliation like that would travel fast. "Actually," Patricia continued, "this helps our case. The public nature of his behavior, the witnesses to his attempt to demean you, all of it, supports our position. His friends might even be called to testify if he contests the divorce." "He won't contest it," I said. I knew Derek well enough to know that. He'd want this over quickly, want to move on and rebuild his image. A drawn-out legal battle would keep his humiliation alive. I was right. Within a week, through his attorney, Derek agreed to mediation for the divorce settlement. He didn't fight, he didn't demand anything unreasonable, he just wanted it done. On Monday, I arrived at the house with professional movers. Derek was there looking haggard. He'd clearly been drinking and probably hadn't slept. When he saw me, he tried one more time. "Can we talk?" "Please, no," I said simply. There was nothing left to say. He watched from the doorway as I directed the movers. I took only what was truly mine, my pottery equipment carefully wrapped and boxed. My books accumulated over years, each one meaningful. My clothes, my personal items, photographs from before I'd met Derek. Things that reminded me of who I was before I got lost in trying to save a marriage that couldn't be saved. The wedding ring I'd worn for 5 years I left on the kitchen counter. Derek picked it up, held it in his palm, looked at me with something like devastation. "I made mistakes," he said quietly. "I'm sorry." "I know you are," I said. "But sorry doesn't fix this. Sorry doesn't undo months of cruelty and betrayal. Sorry is just a word, Derek. It doesn't mean anything without changed behavior. And you had years to change. You chose not to." Those were the last words I spoke to him in our house. I walked out carrying a box of pottery supplies, got into my car behind the moving truck, and drove to the storage unit I'd rented to hold my belongings until I found a new place to live. The legal process moved surprisingly quickly. Derek's affair partner Amber actually reached out to me through social media. She sent a long message explaining that she hadn't known Derek was married, that he'd told her he was divorced. She'd discovered the truth and ended things. She apologized, said she felt terrible. I responded briefly thanking her for the message and telling her I didn't blame her. Derek was the one who'd made vows. Derek was the one who'd lied. She was just another person he'd used. The financial settlement was fair, split down the middle. Derek had to pay my attorney fees because of the hidden accounts and the affair. I walked away with half of everything we'd built together, plus a little extra because the judge didn't look kindly on financial dishonesty. 3 months after that night in the living room, the divorce was finalized. I was legally free. The marriage that had started with so much hope ended with papers signed in a courthouse, no ceremony, no witnesses, just an ending. During those 3 months, I focused on healing. I found a therapist, a woman named Dr. Sarah Martinez, who specialized in recovery from emotionally abusive relationships. Sitting in her comfortable office talking through what I'd experienced, I started to understand the patterns I'd missed, the gradual isolation, the systematic destruction of my confidence, the way Derek had rewritten reality until I questioned my own perceptions. It had a name: emotional abuse. Recognizing it, naming it, helped me process it. I threw myself back into my pottery classes with renewed energy. There was something deeply therapeutic about working with clay, about taking something formless and shaping it into something beautiful and functional. My hands remembered the motions, remembered the satisfaction of creating. I made bowls and mugs and vases, gave them to friends, kept some for myself. Each piece felt like reclaiming a part of myself I'd lost. I reconnected with friends I'd drifted away from during my marriage. They welcomed me back without judgment, made space for me in their lives again. We had dinners and movie nights and long conversations where I could be myself without fear of criticism. I spent more time with my mother, who had never particularly liked Derek, though she'd been too polite to say so directly. "I knew he wasn't right for you," she told me gently one afternoon while we drank tea on her porch. "I could see how small he was making you feel. But you had to see it yourself. I'm so proud of how you handled it." Emma was my constant support. She let me stay with her for 2 months while I looked for my own apartment, never once making me feel like a burden. We stayed up late talking, watched movies, cooked together. She reminded me of who I'd always been before Derek, and slowly that person started to come back. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I stood in my new apartment, taking in the space I'd created. It was small, a one-bedroom in a different neighborhood of Seattle, but it was entirely mine. The walls were painted a warm cream color. Plants filled the windowsills, thriving in the morning light. My pottery pieces were displayed on shelves I'd installed myself. The furniture was a mix of pieces I'd taken from the old house and new things I'd chosen based only on my own taste. I'd thrown myself into my event planning business with renewed focus and energy. Word had spread somehow, maybe through the grapevine of Seattle's tight-knit professional community, about what I'd been through. Instead of hurting my reputation, it seemed to have enhanced it. Clients, especially women clients, sought me out specifically. They trusted me. They saw strength in someone who'd stood up for herself. I was busier than I'd ever been, coordinating weddings and corporate events and charity fundraisers. Each successful event reminded me of my competence, my creativity, my worth. I was good at what I did. I'd always been good at it. I just needed to remember that. I joined a hiking group that met every Sunday morning. We'd explore different trails in the Cascades, rain or shine. The physical challenge of climbing the beauty of the forests and mountains. The easy companionship of people who asked nothing from me except to show up and be present. It all helped me heal. I made new friends through the hiking group and through my pottery class. People who knew me only as I was, now not colored by who I'd been in my marriage. They saw me as confident, independent, strong. I started to see myself that way too. I dated casually, nothing serious. I wasn't ready for serious, and probably wouldn't be for a while. But it felt good to have men treat me with respect, to remember what it was like to be pursued rather than criticized. I went to nice dinners and movies and had interesting conversations. Some turned into second or third dates, some didn't. And I was fine with all of it. One Saturday afternoon, I ran into Derek at a coffee shop downtown. I was meeting Emma for lunch and stopped in to get drinks first. I walked in, and there he was, sitting alone at a table by the window. He looked diminished somehow, smaller. He was staring at his laptop, but not really looking at it. Our eyes met. For a moment, time stopped. I saw surprise flash across his face, followed by something that might have been hope or fear or regret. I felt nothing. No anger, no pain, no longing, just indifference. Complete and total indifference. He looked away first. I ordered my coffee, waited while they made it, and left without looking back. Sat down with Emma at the restaurant next door and told her what happened. "How did it feel?" she asked. "Like seeing a stranger," I said honestly. "Like running into someone I used to know a long time ago but have nothing in common with anymore." That's when I knew I was truly free. Not just legally, but emotionally. Derek had no power over me anymore. He was just a person who'd once been in my life, who taught me hard lessons about my own strength and worth, but who no longer mattered. I learned so much in that year after leaving. I learned that love should never require you to shrink yourself or doubt your reality. I learned that respect is non-negotiable in any relationship, that kindness matters more than chemistry, that words without matching actions are meaningless. I learned my own strength, that I could stand up for myself even when it was terrifying, even when it meant blowing up my life and starting over. I learned that walking away sometimes takes more courage than staying, that ending something broken isn't failure, it's wisdom, that you can love someone and still recognize they're bad for you, that you don't owe anyone your suffering. Most importantly, I learned that I deserved kindness, from partners, from friends, from myself. I deserved to be treated with dignity. I deserved to take up space and have opinions and be valued. And anyone who couldn't see my worth, who needed to diminish me to feel powerful, didn't deserve a place in my life. The woman who stood in that living room and took off her coat, who revealed the truth Derek tried to hide, who refused to be humiliated, that woman had been inside me all along. She'd just been buried under years of trying to be what someone else wanted. But she never disappeared. She waited. And when the moment came, she was ready. A year after that night, I was truly happy. Not the fragile conditional happiness I'd had in my marriage, walking on eggshells and hoping things would improve, but real solid happiness that came from knowing myself, trusting myself, building a life that reflected my values and brought me joy. I still did pottery, still hiked, still coordinated beautiful events, still spent time with people who valued me. I lived alone and loved it. Loved coming home to peace and quiet, to space that was entirely my own. I made decisions without asking permission or worrying about someone's reaction. I wore what I wanted, ate what I wanted, spent my time how I wanted. Sometimes I wondered what would have happened if I'd left earlier, if I'd recognized the warning signs sooner, but I tried not to dwell on that. Every experience, even the painful ones, taught me something. That marriage taught me what I would never tolerate again. It taught me my limits and my strength. It taught me that I could survive hard things and come out better on the other side. And honestly, the look on Derek's face when I took off that coat, when he realized he'd underestimated me completely, when he saw his whole world crumbling around him because of his own arrogance, that was worth something. Not revenge exactly, more like justice. The natural consequence of treating another person with sustained cruelty and contempt. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is take off your coat and show the world exactly who you are, exactly what you're capable of, exactly what you refuse to become. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is no, no more. I'm done. I deserve better. And you do. We all do. What about you? Have you ever had to stand up for yourself in a difficult situation? Have you ever reached a point where you knew you had to walk away from something that was hurting you? Share your story in the comments. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe. Share this with someone who might need to hear it. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it reminds you of your own strength, your own worth, and your own power to change your life when you need to. Take care of yourselves, and remember that you deserve kindness, respect, and love always.